we've had vocal children that, are, at this point we're sitting at the dining room table with the parents, parents in tears because their child's saying, why won't you come? You don't love me. You're
the worst mother ever.
Yeah. I mean, and then
now you're the warden.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But it can be effective if you're consistent and you follow through. And
it is effective if you're consistent. And the hard thing is following through, because if you break down after 20 minutes of crying, the next time you're ready to do this, your child's going to be ready to cry for half an hour or longer. Right. So it's something that's come up in a lot of your the podcasts you've done up to this point, and what we addressed is that balance between having a routine and being flexible and sensitive, and you need to do both and be able to do both. But every time you deviate from a routine, it means the next time you want to impose that routine, it's going to be it likely could be more challenging. And that's okay. You just need to be prepared for that.
Hello, I'm Abby Krisner, and welcome to the Parentcast. My co-host Bill Crawford will be joining us shortly here for this episode, which is dedicated to sleep. I am certainly one of those parents that at some point with my kid, I just thought, this is never going to get better, started cracking open the books and trying to figure out how we could develop that ultimate bedtime routine that works for everybody. For a hot minute, I had one that worked, and then our family moved twice within a year, and then it seemed like nothing worked. So I was really looking forward to this episode. I know Bill has brought up in the past that one of his daughters was having a co-sleeping issue or a sleep dependency issue. So whether you got a baby or a teenager, this could be a really helpful episode for you. So we talk with Zach Benkovitz and Randy Keech. They have an organization called Intervention Fundamentals. So they're helping families by actually going into the home, making a game plan for sleep, potty training, food interventions, communication. Now, this episode only is going to focus on sleep, so keep that in mind. But if you want more resources from Zach and Randy, you can find them at interventionfundamentals.com. What I would suggest is, because this is an episode that is dealing with applied behaviorism, it's a system to get the kids to go to bed. But behaviorism is also a great way to set expectations for behavior in all parts of your kid's life. If you're interested in that, there's like a supplemental episode I think you could check out, which is episode 4 of our Parentcast with Dr. Rachel Kittenbrink. That's a lot of positive and negative reinforcement. We talk about, the timeout share. That kind of comes up in this episode, so I think that's something you might want to check out. Again, if we're talking about behaviorism for kind of disciplining your child or getting a routine down. That's a great episode. One last note before we jump in. When I ask some of my questions, which sound very specific to my situation, really pay attention to the answers here that Randy and Zach provide, because I tried a couple of these things at home over the weekend. I have now 3 nights in a row of a kid that is sleeping like a dream. So I am all in on this episode. So please enjoy, and it's time to get some sleep. Episode 8 of the Parentcast.
The most important thing we think about when you're going to implement a change is to take data. What is going on first, so that when you do make a change, you're sure that change is what maybe had an effect. So we talk about what is their sleep time? Has that been consistent? How are we putting our kid to bed? What are they going to bed with? What are they doing during the day? Because what you do during the day has a huge impact on how tired you are, exercise, diet. Sleep is challenging because it's really like a global kind of issue, and the data. Baseline data is one of the most important things I think you can do to start with, if that makes.
Well, can you elaborate a little bit more on that baseline data?
So I know when I think back, my daughter's 14, so going back this far is sometimes hard.
PTSD.
To read to her.
I remember the big milestones being when we went from 2 naps to 1 nap, and the frustrations that caused when you really needed her to take that second nap and she didn't. And then when you got down to the 1 nap and then she wouldn't, started to grow out of that 1 nap, and I really needed that time to myself. And I spent, an hour and a half and she slept for 20 minutes. And it's like, so what's baseline data? Baseline is, okay, recognizing that things aren't a constant. The child is constantly developing and our life is constantly changing. And so the frustration comes from when your expectations are different than reality. Okay. And so
all the time then?
What's that? Yeah. Right. Exactly. So sometimes we don't have a good sense of what reality is. And that's what baseline data is. So how long is she actually sleeping? And how often is she actually taking 2 naps a week? Mm-hmm. And recognizing, well, when you start spending an hour to get that second nap, and often it's fighting, and she's only falling asleep half the time. Well, there's your baseline. For the last 2 weeks, we've been fighting 2 out of every 3 days to get this nap. Maybe we should see how she does without that second nap.
My kid is the kid at daycare that doesn't nap.
Right.
The only one in the room, apparently. Right. And she
what
does.
Is she doing?
Yeah, she get a private space. Yeah.
So I've tried to be
rating
kinder
the
to
other
myself.
kids' snacks.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's just going through and just being like, Lunchables, please. So this is what I don't know, because we were fighting a lot at home to try to just get the one nap.
Right.
Because like you said, I need the time.
Yes.
I need an hour break,
Right.
or I need like an hour and a half to get my day together.
Mm-hmm.
So selfishly, you want the nap. But we were fighting a lot, and then I kept framing it as, just let's do quiet time.
Mm-hmm.
This is quiet
Right.
time for an hour. So you're still going in your room, but you can have books, and you can have a stuffed animal to bring in with you. You can sing all you want, but it's quiet time.
Yes.
And that didn't really work after a while either. But so at daycare, she's the one kid who won't sleep. And I feel bad because sometimes the daycare teachers, I think they're trying to be nice to me. They're like, Edie just didn't nap today. So, and I want to be like, it's your fault. You put her in there. You give her quiet time. And I think that is what she's doing. She's like on this little cot, but she's just like
thinking,
like playing with her nose,
Right.
and, reading a book. I don't know what they give her.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
But she's that kid.
We want that time for herself, and that is an interesting challenge. And I think the idea of teaching her to like have quiet time actually was really good, but that's a concerted effort. You have to you can't just be like sit here, and the work that it has taken to teach kids leisure skills is maybe sometimes missed upon people. I remember, I tell Randy this story all the time. I used to get up really early when I was a kid and bother my mom. And one day she just had it, and she was like, "This is how you turn the TV on. This is where the cereal is.
Yeah.
You can do these things by yourself and leave me alone until this time."
You just introduced a phrase that I really like, leisure skills, which is just a really nice way of saying like kids don't know how to be bored.
Yeah.
And just be still and figure out what's going on with themselves. That we live in an age now where there's screen time to try to navigate, and these kids are just being inundated with images and stimulated constantly. So every moment that they're not stimulated, they feel like, well, what's going on here?
Right.
Like I always tell people, my kids treat me like a really shitty manager, and they're like, "Why aren't you booking more gigs for us? Like, what's on the docket for today?"
Yes,
I'm like,
right.
"I don't know."
Yeah,
I'm like pulling my hair out, trying to figure out what to do with them.
Yes.
And at some point, you lose your mind and go, "Here's how to turn the TV on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go in your
Cereal.
room." Like,
Right.
And you're just you don't, as a parent, you don't have the skills.
No. It's missed upon us, I think, sometimes how difficult that stuff is to do. Like it's not, we're not born knowing how to just chill out or relax.
Right.
It's actually something that I think adults struggle with, how to meditate and how to find alone time and just be quiet. And I wasn't really actively taught those things much, in school or anything like that. So they are important skills.
So where do you guys go for what is your research source to fish from and then take to the parents?
Oh,
So it's funny they said fish.
Google Scholar.
Google Scholar.
Google Scholar. So actually, I would recommend that to all parents, as opposed to going on the internet and searching. in Google, go to Google Scholar first.
Oh, I thought he was joking for a second. I thought it was like a slam
No,
term. Like,
Google's-
Google Scholar, like
No.
Google Scholar's pretty
social
good.
warrior kind of
Right.
thing.
not just straight Google,
not
like
not pop research,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
real research.
actual peer-reviewed literature.
So that's where we go.
Okay.
Is the research. And
Oh, yeah, I did think they were joking. Like, Twitter tough guy. Go to
Google Scholar.
I
Wow.
wish I was that.
facebookpsychologist.com.
well, no, but it's interesting to bring that up because a lot of people do jump on Google and will search something and find an article that was written in a magazine and think it might be a cure-all and jump to it. And it's a skill to learn how to read research, understand what that research means, how applicable that research is to your specific situation.
You have to address your family's culture. And we talk about culture a lot, not so much in terms of are you from the North Hills or the South Hills or China or Brazil. We talk about it in terms of how do you guys view parenting when we're sitting at a table with a family talking about what we do, because we go in for an assessment and we don't provide treatment to every family that approaches us, because some families hear what it is we do, and that doesn't work with how they want to approach things. And we've had families also say that's not for us, and then 2 years down the road contact us again and say, hey, we're ready for it now.
It's for us
so
now.
It's for us now, right.
Yeah.
And so just because it's not for you at point A doesn't mean it's not going to be for you at point B. And just because it worked for your best friend doesn't mean it's what's right for you to try.
Okay. Which is what's cool about the two of you is that you're actually in the home. You can kind of, again, spend a lot of time with these
Right.
families and get to know their culture. And then that kind of, I would
tailor something custom for
Exactly.
each family.
Yeah, I mean, we have to do it, but I mean, sleep's a little different. Of the things that we work on, it's the thing that we can do stepwise, and where we spend actually the least amount of time in the home
Right.
is with sleep, compared to toilet training or feeding or communication.
because it's the easiest one to resolve, or because why do you think it's less time?
Because it's so it's a lot more stepwise, systematic, changing one thing at a time. There's a lot that goes into that bedtime routine. And what we really work on with families, there are two big skills, is sleep onset is terminology. So for the time it takes for you to fall asleep, we should be falling asleep within minutes of
Hitting
laying
pillow.
down.
Like five.
Hey, Bill and I need your help as well. Would you
My
like
wife needs my help.
I need my own help.
Right. So, but really, if you're not falling asleep within 10 minutes, then there are some things that we can address with you, like in terms of when you're putting yourself to sleep and what you're doing in the day leading up to that point. And so that's one thing. And the other thing is just co-sleeping. A lot of the families that we work with struggle with co-sleeping, and normally that's a path you go down because you're so desperate to sleep, you'll do anything. So,
Right.
so one parent or the other parent starts sleeping with the child. And so another thing that we're going to talk about is sleep dependencies. What do you need in order to fall asleep?
Right.
So for some infants, their thumb or a pacifier is a completely appropriate sleep dependency, but anyone that's dealt with a child that uses a pacifier has had that pacifier fall out of the crib, and then it's like, and the frantic look of where's the pacifier,
Right.
where's the pacifier? I
Right.
don't know if you guys,
Yeah.
my daughter did a
Definitely.
pacifier,
Yeah.
and so that, I mean, making sure you have pockets full of pacifiers.
Oh,
Yeah.
when you-
Oh, I'm rolling
Yeah.
deep. I probably have 3 in my
Right.
purse
I
just
got
in
a
case she
banana
shows
clip.
up.
Right.
Banana
Yeah.
clip.
And,
The banana clip. Oh, yeah.
right. Yes. But then we'll talk about a sound machine, and one of your guests talked about, just turn up the sound machine so you don't hear the child crying.
Yeah.
But the sound machine can also be something that is a healthy sleep dependency. Almost
I can't sleep if there's it sounds like there's a screaming child in an ocean. I have a hard time sleeping to
worst.
that. That's not my jam.
No.
That's not my go-to
I
bed
used
jam.
to have a really hard time with my husband putting a fan on at night because he needs white
Right.
noise to
Noise.
sleep.
Right.
And it was the same thing because I'm like, I can't hear Edie.
Right.
What happened? So now I'm worked up. I'm just not going to hear her. And it's the same
Right.
thing. There's something about that sound of the ocean or whatever where if you hear a little off noise. You're like, that's it.
Yep.
He's been screaming for hours and nobody can hear.
So you asked about why it takes a little longer for us. So one thing we might implement to start would be a sound machine, but we'll tell families to purchase one of a specific type and to start in the lowest volume. And each day, a small increase in volume that will go on for weeks until they get that volume up loud enough where it's blocking out other disruptances.
Until they can get the surround sound Bose speaker.
Right, exactly. Right. It's a slow process.
For some kids and for some parents, putting a sound machine in the hallway is enough, and you turn it up every day. And in fact, when you get up to a decent level, then actually that resolved the sleep issues.
Right.
Okay.
We didn't have to do anything more.
Gotcha.
And so it can be that simple, because that sound machine, we go through cycles in our sleep, and when we actually all wake up throughout the night, even on a night where you wake up feeling great and you slept for 8 hours straight. Like there were times where you were briefly awake and alert. And if a siren or your baby starts crying during one of those really alert moments, you might have a great deal of difficulty falling back asleep. What the white noise machine does is it gives you something else to focus on during those alert stages that helps you get back to sleep.
Oh, okay.
So
Never thought about that, never knew that. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And so not only does it block out some noise so you don't hear it, but it also gives your brain something, oh, okay, that was just... the cat knocked a book off the shelf noise, and I can go right back to sleep.
Right.
Okay.
We're not saying that you should turn it up so loud that you don't hear your baby crying.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's not the goal of it.
I wanted to ask you guys something about sleep dependency, because my oldest daughter has had a really hard time sleeping when she thinks that I'm going to leave the room when she's not looking. And for me, every night it's like the escape scene from Shawshank Redemption. Like I'm timing the rock with exactly when the lightning strikes, and trying to sneak out of the room. And if I make one creak in the floor, she's like, "Where are you going?" And then I'm reset, and it's
You gotta start
20
over.
more minutes.
You gotta start over, right.
And you're currently in this.
Yeah.
This is a reality.
She has a lot of anxiety.
Right.
Like she wakes her. I've seen her like open mouth breathing, deep sleep, and wake herself up with anxiety and just anxiousness. And where did he go? And
So there's several things we can talk about with that. Do you want to?
No, I mean, it takes that assessment to find out at the beginning. It's why when we find out what those sleep dependencies are, if there's something that can't be permanent, you can't be there for 10 hours for her whole sleep, then we want to try to replace those with other sleep dependencies that are more permanent. So first,
like a backup dad, or
a backup dad, or
You're another dude you want to bring in.
second string. You're in.
You need like a nighttime shift. Yeah, and
We found
This is Sean Casey. He's going to hang out with you
This is
tonight.
the graveyard dad. He'll be here throughout the night.
any questions? Just
Really good baseball stories.
Right.
Hit him up.
Sean Casey's a good dude. They finding something that can be a better replacement, and then there's a lot of different approaches to fading, but one of them could be staying for a certain period of time, and then you're saying you're going to leave, and you're going to increase or decrease that amount of time that you're staying in the room each day or each week, and then doing check-ins, saying I will come back, and if you're going to have a check-in that you're going to do with your kid, and you have to follow through with that. So if it's going to be every 15 minutes or every 20 minutes, even if they're sleeping, you can still pop in to say, hey, I love you, sweet dreams. Keeping those moments really, really brief is important, but there's a lot of approaches you could do to try to...
And check-ins could start out at 5 seconds.
Right.
Like where you literally just walk out of the room
and come
right back in. It's and then you slowly progress up to 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes. And within that process, then all of a sudden you find out, hey, she's fallen asleep.
Right.
And eventually you get distracted and you don't check in and she doesn't wake up. Another alternative that we use a lot with the children that are co-sleeping is the researcher that did this is Patrick Fryman. He's fantastic. He works at Boys Town in Nebraska, and it's called the bedtime pass. And so we'll make we laminate little, individualize them, but make like door hangers, like for do not disturb at like a hotel type of door hangers. And we give the child 3 of those. We do it for 4 things. If you wanted to add something to this list, you could. But you can exchange a nighttime pass to get a hug and a kiss from mom or dad.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right.
I like this.
You can exchange it for a drink of water. You can exchange it to go to the bathroom. And you can exchange it temperature, like to get a blanket because you're too hot or too cold. Right. So basic needs and emotional security are what we're addressing with that. Otherwise, you really shouldn't get out of bed, is our philosophy. Like it's bedtime, it's time to sleep. We give them 3 of those. Okay, so most kids that we do this with exchange those 3 for a hug and a kiss from mom and dad immediately, like within the first 5 minutes.
All of them are gone.
Okay.
Empty
their pockets.
So when we...
They're not savers.
No.
When we do this, we've done everything. We've done the sleep machine, all of that. Most of that's remotely, all of these changes. And then we have the family set aside 3 nights. And we scheduled those 3 nights. We're going to be there for the bedtime routine. And they're going to go through the bedtime routine. And we're going to be there when they put their child to bed alone in their own room for the first time. And so the child comes running out. One of us redirects the child to get the bedtime pass and exchange it with their parents. We've already coached their parents. Okay, it's not another 5-minute or half an hour story time or bedtime routine. It's a hug and a kiss. I love you. And you put them back in their room.
Brief and
in less than a minute, 30 seconds. Child comes running back out. So sometimes we have to prompt them again. Okay, this is pass number 2. They exchange it, and same thing, back to bed. And then often, if not the second time, the third time, the child comes out with that last pass, and they're pretty proud at this point. Like, this is cool. They haven't processed, wait, this is the last one yet.
Right.
We do that. Now, this is the hard part. 4th time the child comes out, there's no pass.
You're out of rations.
Right.
The first time, I'll model generally. One of us will model for the family. If the family's feeling up to it, they can do it. You're putting them back and you're not saying a word.
Right. No hug or
Not
kiss.
one word.
Ooh.
That sounds like that's the hardest
That
part.
is
It's to not acknowledge.
Yeah.
Yes, but this is what we're preparing you for, and this is why we say it's not for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you've got to really, are you going to be ready for this? Is your family, is your relationship with your husband, with your wife, with your child ready for this? If you are, it's really a valuable tool to be able to just silently put them back. We've had vocal children that, at this point, we're sitting at the dining room table with the parents, parents in tears because their child's saying, why won't you come? You don't love me. You're
the worst mother ever.
Yeah. I mean, and then
now you're the warden.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, oh, no.
Right.
But it can be effective if you're consistent and you follow through. And
it is effective if you're consistent. And the hard thing is following through, because if you break down after 20 minutes of crying, the next time you're ready to do this, your child's going to be ready to cry for half an hour or longer. Right. So it's something that's come up in a lot of your the podcasts you've done up to this point. And what we address is that balance between having a routine and being flexible and sensitive. And you need to do both and be able to do both. But every time you deviate from a routine, it means the next time you want to impose that routine, it's going to be it likely could be more challenging. And that's okay. You just need to be prepared for that. Okay, I'm letting you have all this junk food today because it's a special day.
Right. It's Halloween and you can eat all this candy, but then at this day, it's...
I know, you're going to behave worse at some, maybe later on today. Tomorrow you're going to behave worse. But if I go back to a routine and stick to it, we can get there. But each deviation from the routine will make it more challenging the next time.
So and you made me think of something that I know has happened to us a bunch of times where, so we'll have the baby monitor on and we'll go downstairs to watch a movie. And this is our reprieve. And we're 3 floors away from her now. So it's just it's date night now. Right. All right, there's no kids. This is great. But then if she starts to cry, normally one of us kind of like goes to get up right away, and the other one says, no.
Yeah.
Like, let's wait it out. Let's
Yep.
wait it out. What happens and where we're failing is that as soon as she starts saying, I need my mommy, and I'm going like all of my anxiety comes
Sure.
in, all of my fears that all of a sudden I'm like flashback
Right.
to that I had when I was a little kid, and then I am up there.
Right.
Now, and I want to give you 2 points to kind of tackle here, because there's that, and that's that parental guilt, which obviously I think I know what your answer for that is. But the other thing is that physically, my daughter is strong. She's 35 pounds. She is half of my height. And so when we were...
Does the P90X videos.
She does.
Right.
Insanity
Right.
on a
Right.
daily
Right.
basis and wants more. She did gym bus 3 times this week.
Right.
So it's like... What I have found is when we were following that book, which said exactly what you said, where it's like, in the instances where the baby's crying and comfort is required, you can do that, but you put the baby right back down with no fanfare, cover him back up, and get out of the room. What started to happen is when we're going to put her back down, she's physically like already like jumping out of the crib, like she is kind of strong-arming us. And I remember my husband, who's much more, physically suited for her than I am, has said, he goes, what am I supposed to do? Like physically fight with her? Like if she's jumping into my arms,
Submit
I'm like,
her.
you're out of the crib. Like we're starting over already.
Right.
Get her in an arm bar.
Right.
And
Chicken
end
wing that
it.
girl.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you?
No, I mean it's what works for each family. Like I'm one that does not like to get physical if I don't have to. I don't want to unintentionally injure somebody. It's why working on these things when they're as young as possible can help, because as they get older, the kids push back in a variety of ways. I want to talk about the language piece first, then I'll let Randy talk maybe a little bit more about the physical. We talk a lot about how sometimes language gets in the way of things. It's the kids that can talk or are more vocal. Some people think that'd be easier because you can rationalize with them. And you talked about this whole like negotiation thing the one time. Conversation's like the worst. And having a non-vocal kid or non-verbal kid sometimes can make doing a behavioral intervention more easy. When a kid is saying to you, you're the worst mother ever, or mom, I need you, those are just words. It doesn't necessarily mean that the child is actually having a crisis moment. And they've learned that if I say this always gets the response from you. And so trying to just tune out what that language is and just responding to the behavior instead is important.
Did you hear that, Abby?
Yes.
It's not the actual words.
Yes.
It's hard.
Not that dagger of pain that she's trying to...
People are often like, we'll end a day where a kid is, in tears, crying for something, and we always try our best to end on a good note, but we'll come back the next day and the kids are running up to us. They're so excited to see us. And the parents are like, I thought they were going to hold a grudge against you. It's like, they don't. Like, once a new day starts, the kids are moved on to the next thing. Kids are very resilient, I've found.
Parents, not so much. And that's what I'm finding out through the course of this podcast is really just, it's a lot of parenting is sorting yourself out.
Yeah.
Like, how much of this am I projecting?
All of it.
How much of the anxiety that I'm perceiving my kid to have is my anxiety?
Right.
Like, all of these things are like my issues.
Yes. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's just a lot of truth to that.
I think like one of those reasons why I react to Edie is because there was something about like, again, you don't remember a lot about being a kid, you find, until you're much older, and then you think about like the toys that you used to like or the TV shows that you used to watch. But having Edie in some weird way tapped into this part of my brain I had shut down, and when she started having these sleep issues, I did start remembering being in my mother's arms and knowing she was going to leave, but knowing to yell.
Yeah.
Knowing to yell when she started to get up.
Right.
Like she was going to leave the room. And I remember it was tied to an anxiety. It was tied to I don't want my mommy to go. And so, I've then used that in my adult brain to rationalize what she says to me. Yes. Oh, she means it, man. She has full comprehension of what could happen. And she gets it, whatever.
Right.
So.
You can go. I mean, the check-ins are so important, like doing things not contingent on their behavior, but on a predetermined set of rules that you've established. So we're going to go to watch this movie and we will check in on her at 30 minutes. Whether she's crying or not, we can go and do that. Sometimes can work, or having rules about if there's crying, not doing it. And having that predetermined plan as opposed to just doing it when you've hit your limit, then that's not good.
You don't want to ever get, like, that's never where you want to start from.
Right.
When you break down.
When you break down.
Yeah.
When you, exactly right.
I mean, all of my bad behavior with my daughter has come when I've been stressed out about other stuff completely unrelated to
Right.
her. When I've been trying to juggle. It's why spectacular doing this job with other people's children and suck at it with my own family, because it's real life is that there are 10 different things you need to be doing, whereas when I'm working, in a family's home, I only have one responsibility.
Singular focus.
Yeah.
Right. Or it might start to elevate if my wife or daughter starts texting me about something, and then I'm like, but I quickly shut that down,
Right.
because I'm working. But at home you can't. There are dogs, there are cat, there's my daughter, there's my wife, there's work, my business partner. There's all of these things, and so my behavior is much worse at home than it is when I'm working in a home, and that it gets to. There's research, and I'm not out there advocating for spanking or corporal punishment or those sort of things, but the research shows that actually the more stable child is not based on whether or not there was corporal punishment or no punishment. It was whatever that was being done consistently. Mm-hmm. What creates instability and anxiety is when we don't know if I'm going to get yelled at this time for doing this thing. Sometimes I get praised for it. Sometimes I get yelled at. It's that inconsistency that as parents, we are going to be inconsistent, but minimizing the degree of that inconsistency is the most important thing.
Okay.
And that doesn't matter if we're talking about sleep or talking about diet or, talking about time with the TV or screen time, that sort of thing. It's being consistent and basing it on some guiding principle as opposed to our mood.
Sure.
It's so funny that you're saying this, because it just made me think of something that now makes total sense. Like, my kids used to watch the movie Frozen, and it literally, until they broke our DVD player. Like, we watched it that many times, and I couldn't understand why they wanted to see this so many times, because the first time they were kind of like scared of a couple scenes, and then I started to realize it's because they know what's next.
Yes.
They like to know what's coming up next, and that kind of goes to what you're saying. Like, the fear of the unknown is huge for a kid, because everything is the unknown.
Right.
So the more that they can know and be reassured in that knowledge, the easier it is for them to feel like
You talked about this
safe.
in one of your episodes about how the children thrive in structure, and we think sometimes we want to be like a good friend to them or something, and have like parenting where maybe there's a lack of structure and they don't know what to expect. They're gonna misbehave because they have no idea what you want them to do.
Where do you stand on cry it out? Because you would think, depending on the parent that you ask, that cry it out's like a nothing thing. Like, of course you let them cry it out. Everybody cries it out. And then other parents were like, no, absolutely never on the cry it out. So where do you guys stand on that, and where do you kind of find that you're implementing?
Right in the middle.
Okay.
None of these things we're talking about are like like magic pills or something. Like, they all take work. They're not for everyone. But it's important for a child to learn how to regulate their own emotions. And that's the value of crying it out.
We had a colicky daughter, so that was not...
Right, so that wouldn't work.
I wanted to mention about
rule,
medical. It's really important to talk to a doctor before really implementing a lot of things, to say, hey, first, are there any medical issues? So when we go in, when we talked about doing like an assessment or baseline, we want to make sure a child doesn't have a seizure disorder, because that can cause a huge issue with sleep and stuff, being colicky, et cetera. So you really need to know first, are there any barriers to that kind of behavioral treatment?
Right. So the medical, that's why that's another nice thing. I mean, your daughter's a little too young for that nighttime pass, but once a child's in a regular bed and they're able to get up and down on their own, it's a really appropriate time to institute the nighttime pass. But rule number one of applied behavioral analysis is first rule out medical causes. And so you need to attend to a child who has a fever. You don't let a child who has a fever cry it out.
She's got to figure it out. Soothe yourself.
Regulate your temperature.
Right.
But But a child
She's got a broken arm.
Well, figure it
She'll
out.
fix it. She'll
Yeah,
fix
well,
it.
actually, I broke my leg trying to climb out of my crib, and my leg got stuck when I was a kid.
Oh,
Ah.
And I didn't get taken to the hospital for like 12 hours.
Oh, my
Because
God.
wait, because they were letting you cry it out.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't seem that bad. My mom didn't know. My mom's a great mom, but yeah,
Put a
yeah, it was
Band-Aid
the
on it.
70s.
It's the
It'll be fine.
We're not raising a sissy here.
Right. So,
I want to mention also about the bedtime passes. Sometimes something we implement is if they don't use all of them, they can exchange them in the morning for something. So we've done
Ooh, I
something
like that.
And that's how you can do that positive kind of reinforcement as well. And kids have learned that, okay, I got 2 bedtime passes left and I can exchange them for, if they're cognizant enough about money, they could do money, or
Yeah,
a
you
special thing to
talked
have
about
with breakfast or something like
I
that.
like this.
so we've
Roll-over
done
mix.
25 cents for 1, 50 cents for 2, and a dollar for all 3.
You have to
You know,
negotiate with the girls 'cause
really
they do the
incentivize.
SS.
My
They-
kids are not.
They're like a little more.
Not with the change.
We actually
Yeah,
worked with
yeah,
a kid
They
who
want dollars.
kind of understood
Well,
like
then
the
they'll have to
economy.
save all 3.
Right.
That's the
I had a little girl that saved up because she wanted like a Nintendo or a system or something.
Yeah.
She didn't use it all at once. She kind of understood the delayed gratification. and
Wow.
it worked for them. She was about 7.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but
Gonna
you know,
end up being like an accountant.
Right. No,
or something.
exactly. Work for the Fed.
Right.
you know, with getting back to the cry it out, if the physical needs have been met, if they're crying because they want you, your daughter's crying because she wants mom, but it's bedtime, then we would argue that, you know, if you're okay with it, that's actually a good thing for her to work through. Do you want her to need you
Right.
to go to sleep the rest of her life, or some surrogate that represents mom, or do you want her to have the ability to put herself to sleep? You know, for people who struggle with sleep as adults, like, it's a really important question to ask is like, we want life to be better for our children. And so one of the ways doing
Right.
that sometimes
Right.
might be crying it out.
Right.
You know what's funny is we were talking a lot. You guys were talking about culture, and I remember thinking, like, when I first had kids, I'm like, I'm raising them Chinese because I read Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mom, and it made so much sense to me. I'm like, they are raising adults.
Yeah.
They are bypassing the joys of childhood
Right.
for fully functioning adults.
Right.
Where, like, this childhood, we put such an emphasis on it in our culture, and it's like such this small window
Yeah.
that, like, we peak super early, and then everything's like, it's not that. Like, we had
Right.
our golden years were when we were 10,
Right.
and now we're not 10 for like a long time.
Yes.
Right.
For most of the time.
Right.
Right.
And so I struggled with that, but then there's just so many restrictions in terms of, I think, like, what you guys are saying is right down the middle. Like,
Right.
you can raise your kid to be self-sufficient, independent, but also, like, that joy
Yeah.
has to be mixed in.
For sure. Absolutely.
Meeting some serious emotional needs for sure.
Yeah.
We started doing something where for a while there I got cycled out of bedtime because it was such an issue,
heard
and
this.
it was just going to save our relationship if it was like, and it was hard for me because, again, not there in the morning, so I don't get morning, and now I don't get night, which
Right.
made me really kind of feel bad about myself. So it was important to kind of cycle back in. And you know, doing things dad's way was not my favorite thing because it took us out of that routine that I thought we had established so well. We're like, hey, we go upstairs, we brush our teeth, we get in the bathtub, we get changed, 3 books, lights off, you go to bed.
Then he threw in floor time.
And then he threw in floor time. I love that you listen to the episodes. He
Mixed
threw
in the floor time, which
because
is dangerous with a kid who fights.
yeah,
Now you gotta grapple.
she's basically doing like the
Next
finish
Ronda-
him move right
next Ronda
before we're
Rousey.
starting.
She's gonna
Yeah,
ground
she's
and
my baby
pound.
Ronda
You know
Rousey.
this.
So and again because he is such a sweetheart, and he saw again the same
Right.
things that I see and go like, I just want you to feel good. But what we also learned that happened inside of that, like, now we lay down thing, which I don't get, which for anybody who is not listening to the podcast as well as Zach and Randy would be, my husband will, like, you know, still do the books and rock her to bed, but then as soon as the light goes out, she's like, I need the floor. I need to lay on the floor. And then he has to lay down with her. She has to fall asleep there. Then she has to be carefully transferred to the crib, which is also, hold your breath during that, like Tom Cruise Mission Impossible, and then out the door.
Right.
So now I find that I have to do that too, because now anything less is unacceptable. Right. But what I learned is that introduced this idea for her that she's really manipulated, that she can negotiate.
Yes.
She can say, oh, wait, I need milk. Like right now. I know we're just getting started, but I didn't have my milk. Or like, hey, I don't like these jammies.
Right.
I got to wear a different pair of jammies. And now you're like, oh, you're so full of shit. Like, oh my God, like how are we going to get through this? So let's talk about those negotiations and kind of how we overcome those.
Yep, sure. So I'm going to briefly talk about some things I brought that are kind of cool, I think.
Okay.
There's these free assessments you can get online. One's called the FISH, which is a family inventory of sleep habits.
Okay.
The other one is the child sleep habit questionnaire. And we give these to parents before we start working. And we have them answer these. And it's kind of fascinating. Parents will often say, we just need one copy. We do it the same. And we're like, no, why don't you guys fill them out separately? And then we'll start our meeting by kind of like analyzing the comparison, and it's amazing how different one parent puts their kids to bed and the other one does. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you need to be aware that you're going to get pushback if in one environment you're allowed floor time and the other one
you're not.
You're not.
Sure.
So I think having a pre-planned kind of routine and what structure is going to be helps with that. One of the reasons the bedtime passes are so successful is it creates that structure. I want new jammies. Like, well, what are the rules? How do you get what are you allowed to have once we say it's time for bed, and what do you need to do in order to be able to have access to those things?
Okay.
So creating as much structure, I think, as possible is good.
Again, this gets back to baseline data as well. Like, okay, what are the things she's asking for, and taking care of those before.
Right.
Because this is not, you've said this much. She's manipulating you. She's negotiating. This is not some basic need that needs to be met. This is her, and really it's where we said language gets in the way. It's, it would be in some ways easier to deal with her just crying, as opposed to when you put her in, okay, she's just upset because I'm putting her down. Well, children with language then are just using those words because they're upset. She's not saying she needs milk or change her pajamas. She's saying she doesn't want you to leave. She doesn't want the day to end, and for that light to go out and for you to walk away. That's all she's saying.
Right.
And we know that she needs her sleep.
Right.
But this also gets to another point, we talked about earlier on, that we should all be falling asleep within minutes of laying down. And so when you put your child to bed can be as problematic as any of the other stuff we talked about.
Yeah, that actually, you know what? I would love to launch into that because we talked about my daughter not sleeping, and I'm taking all those papers
okay.
that you
Yeah,
just
yeah.
did, by the way.
Two.
We have 2 copies. Right.
Good, thank you. Because she's not taking that nap, that coveted nap, that when we get her at the end of the day, she's a little wild, and you can tell there is the start of an emotional breakdown of a kid who's exhausted.
Yes.
To the point where sometimes I see her on Saturday mornings, because again, remember, I'm not there in the morning, so when I see her on Saturday mornings, I'm like, she is a blast.
Right.
Yeah.
I love her. She's so funny, and she's really flexible. She just isn't asking for a lot.
Right.
And I
Morning
realized
Edie is the best Edie.
Right.
I know.
She's a morning person.
She's a morning person, but then I normally see her on a weekly basis from 5 o'clock on.
Yes.
So I get those last couple of hours with her, and she's
Right.
not as nice.
Right.
And so I'm realizing I have this exhausted kid who fights me so much on bedtime that we've moved the bedtime back. But now I keep thinking, I wonder if we're having so much trouble at bedtime because we've moved it back.
Right.
Maybe she has to go to bed earlier, and that solves some of the issues that are kind of coming with her just emotionally breaking down before I even get a crack at her.
How do you guys determine the bedtime for your kids?
It used to be 7 o'clock because it was 12 hours from when she woke up.
Right. And 12 hours came from
all the mommy blogs.
All the mommy
Right,
blogs.
right.
Yeah, the mommy blogs that tell me that every child's supposed to get 12 hours of
Not
sleep.
Google Scholar.
Right.
Yeah, not Google Scholar like I should have done. But we started with like 7 o'clock, but then we were finding like 7 o'clock was like, she thinks it's like a disco up in
Yes.
there, and we're not going to bed at all. And so
We
we
should probably get rid of this disco ball.
you know what? The trap music is a lot. So then we started saying, okay, you know, she's getting a little bit older. Maybe it's 7:30. Maybe we try 7:30. And now it's 8. And now it's 8:30.
Right.
Like, meaning that we've started bedtime by 8, but we're not going to bed until like 8:30.
So the Sleep Foundation has these guidelines they set out for how much sleep a child should get. And one of the new things they've kind of done is make it more of a range based on age, not just 12 hours if you're this age, because everyone's uniquely built and we're different. And the most important thing is that you're doing what you need or what your child needs specific to them. And we talked a little bit with naps. You know, the best part about a nap is that you get some time also to take care. So sometimes parents are also putting their kids to bed at an earlier time because they're like, I need to do the dishes. I need to like find time to like exist.
Like an hour of a Netflix
I got to
show.
close this restaurant,
Right.
and then I get a little me time.
And in reality, it actually might be better to push back. What you were doing is maybe better, but not starting the bedtime routine at the same time and putting that actual bedtime back. Starting that bedtime routine, I think about 30 minutes is good for a bedtime routine, depending on what you're incorporating into it. You know, I like to think about it like after bath, you know, and having that be very structured, kind of brief, and that when that's a signal to the child, like, or to the adult, whoever's doing that routine, it's bedtime. But having it be later can be good if it's causing the person to fall asleep quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the consistency we've talked about again. That's the importance of the bedtime routine. Is so first A, then B, then C, so that they know what's coming after each step. And then the other thing is the progression of those activities. Like, we often see it, the alternative side, where it's mom that spends most of the time with them and dad's coming home after the day of work. And what we'll find is dad gets home, they eat dinner, and then it's wrestle time, you know, with dad.
Yeah.
And the kids get all fired up. And then it's like, okay, time for bed.
Yes.
And
Mommies are not a fan of that, I've found.
Not stoked on it. No.
So I mean, the progression of the wrestling could be part of the bedtime routine, but it should be the first thing.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, like watching a show together on Netflix, or, you know, like, could be part of the bedtime routine, but it should be the first thing. You know, like, you should progressively go from more light and more activity to less light and less activity.
Okay.
What about screen time, like close to bed? Because I've read, and not on Google Scholar, but I have read some books and some different some daddy
Every time
blogs.
you say Google, we get paid 25
Yes.
So
Building some sponsorships to this podcast. Let's do this.
So I've read that, you know, you really should not inundate yourself with screen time within a 2-hour window of you going to sleep.
This book is also I don't get paid for this, I promise. It's called Solving Sleep Problems in Children with Autism Spectrum Disorders. It is not just for children with autism, though, which is wonderful. It lays out sleep stuff super simply. It talks about like an hour before bedtime, but in general, like, the less light you can have, screen time especially, towards bed, the better. And there's some apps and some parental controls that can actually change and dim that light if you have a child that for whatever reason needs that screen time.
A nighttime
mode.
Yeah.
They're doing that with like Twitter now, I think. And I'm like addicted to reading my phone before I go to bed. And for me, it doesn't cause me a problem. I can read my phone and fall asleep with it in my hand. But if it's a problem for you or your child, then it's definitely something to target, trying to eliminate or reduce. Exercise and light during the day is super important. The light actually helps you build up hormones in your body that help you sleep, but when you turn off that light, it's what helps to activate what you were kind of building up.
The melatonin.
Melatonin, yeah. And so it's definitely important, I think, that the access to light during the day.
Google to know.
So, I mean, a big key is, if it's not a problem, don't worry about it. Just because it's a general rule,
right,
doesn't mean it applies to you. So there are plenty of people that watch a show on TV or on their whatever screen and go straight to bed and have no trouble with their sleep. So we're not going to tell that person no screen time,
Right.
you know, but if you're having trouble falling asleep or your child's having trouble falling asleep, that's definitely one of the things you should look at.
Right. And there's also, we talked a little bit about bedtime. There's a kind of like a rhythm that you go throughout a day of like tiredness, alertness.
Yes.
And there's this thing that's referred to as the forbidden zone, which is like kind of late in the evening, everyone gets like a second wind of
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
and like some parents, because they're really focused on that 12 hours of sleep, are putting their kids to bed in that forbidden zone. And it is like nearly impossible for a person to fall asleep at that time. And about an hour.
That's the disco zone.
It's the disco zone. No, it is. We're gonna rebrand that right now. So putting kids to bed in the disco zone is like awful. But an hour after that, about or so, is usually actually when they start dipping back down and should be more tired.
So that's kind of to your point where you're saying, like, when we were starting to say, okay, we're going to move it back a half hour because
Yeah.
it's not working.
Mhm.
So that is an
It's
acceptable
absolutely acceptable. And then if it works and you need to, for some reason, make adjustments, you can do incremental changes back to see how that works. But later bedtimes are something I would move to more quickly than earlier.
Okay, because I think the thing that we learned, actually, we had a date night a couple weeks ago. We got to go to a Penguin game, and we're like, awesome, date night. But we knew that meant all of a sudden, wow, we're the two bedtime people, and we know how to deal with all these quirks,
Yeah.
but like really nobody else does. And
Right.
so my aunt watched Edie, and I left her like a couple notes of just like how to work the TV and stuff. And then I left her one other note that said, here's how bedtime normally goes.
Right.
But then on the bottom, it said, you do not have to do bedtime.
Yes.
And I just said to Joe, I'm like, hey, listen, she's going to feel like garbage tomorrow morning. Like, let's just let her stay up because I can't do this to somebody else.
Yeah.
And it went beautifully.
We got home and she was asleep on the floor in her bedroom. Like, just she told my aunt she wanted to read books and was like, poof.
Yep.
She probably fell asleep at like 9,
Right.
but she
But she
went
fell
to bed on her own
Zonked
and
out.
just zonked out. And so I said to Joe, I'm like, well, at least we know it can be done
Yeah.
and that
Right.
she's capable of it without all the accoutrement.
And she did it herself. That's
Did
the
it herself.
self-regulation we're talking about, that there is a value to, and it's sort of that balance. Okay, go, like if you have a child that can comply with going to their room and not, like, your daughter's too young for this, although maybe not.
Yeah.
She just demonstrated in that environment she wasn't. You can read, like you can, and like
Right.
you let them figure it out on their own. And there might be, you were expecting and prepared for a grouchy daughter the next morning. You didn't have it necessarily that time. The next time maybe you would. It's not to say that, I don't struggle with sleep, but there are days where I don't get enough sleep,
Right.
and so like we all have to deal with some of that inconsistency, but the self-regulation is a huge component of it.
One of the things that I learned from a previous guest on the podcast, Chris Brexta, was to give your kids previews in peacetime. Like when
Yes.
things are going okay, you can kind of tell them like what to expect coming up.
Yeah.
Right.
And that really kind of cuts the fight off at the pass.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, it's not saying that there's definitely not going to be an argument, but I told you that this was going to be the deal. And now if you want to react emotionally, that's on you.
on
But
Yeah.
As long as
I'm,
you're consistent with that,
it
absolutely.
helps me too.
Yes.
Oh, it's a huge thing, and he talked about that with like showing them scary movies and,
Yeah.
and the puppets and that
Right.
stuff. But like, one of the skills, there are lots of calming techniques that taking 5 deep breaths, it actually really works. But so many parents like do that with children when the child's already upset, as opposed to making 5 deep breaths a fun activity that you do in good times. It's sort of like keeping a to-do list or your calendar. If you're keeping up with it and doing a really good job with it, you actually don't need it because you're reviewing it so often that everything's in your head and organized. But then when you don't use it, all of a sudden you need it because you're not keeping organized. And so a lot of these calming strategies or techniques are things that maybe you don't need to do all the time with an individual, but if you don't practice them at good times, then they won't be any use to you when you really need them. And
I imagine a lot of parents can come up with like a myriad of different sleep issues and things that are unique to their child. So I want to try to figure out, like, how can we address, let's say, making a more drastic change for the first time with bedtime. It can be like going from a crib to like a big girl bed or a big boy bed, or like saying, okay, from now on, we don't do this step anymore because this is now proved either, unacceptable for the parents or not worth it for the kid. So in my example, let's say we're taking out the floor time. There's no more floor time. But how does that first night go where you say we're not doing the floor time, and like what should parents prepare for when they're going to make a change to what is the routine?
Randy talked a little bit about like necessarily floor time doesn't necessarily have to end, but maybe it's the beginning of the routine. And so really looking at the routine and seeing, is the progression going from intense to relaxation and from having light to not having light? One of the things I like about limiting light, even for kids that might not have a problem with it, is it forces you as a parent to think about more social things you can do with your kids that we don't really do that often anymore. Like playing board games or just reading books as a family unit. Something that's more calm and a little bit more cerebral can be good. And trying to look at that routine and structure and lay it out in a way that is, again, going from kind of intense to.
Can you elaborate a little bit about floor time? Because when you talked about it in the other podcast, it made me think that he was playing with her on the floor.
No.
But
Floor
it's
time
actually,
is
he
I've
puts her
never
to sleep
bought
on the
one
floor.
of those. I never bought one of those pieces of furniture that had the changing pad on top of it.
Okay.
I just was a little more granola mom about it, and I bought a changing pad, but it was on the floor.
Right.
And so what she likes to do, and the changing pad is not where you want her to lay down necessarily, but what she does is, if we're rocking, and again, another element to this that's, to be fair, is because she is very tall, so either one of us rocking her probably looks a little ridiculous. Like, because she's 2.5, but she looks like she's 4.
Right.
So we're like trying to rock her the way we always did. And so
her
what'll
feet
happen
are touching the ground.
Yeah, pretty much.
God, you are growing. You are a growing girl.
So what, like, this kind of transition, again, that she wanted and he went with, is that if you start to rock her, like, she could be like totally asleep, but as soon as you go to get up to put her in the crib, she goes, like, points to the floor.
Yeah, right.
Or that you start rocking her and she's not ready for bed at all, so she just slides down and helps herself to the floor. And so she'll put a pillow there and grab her blanket and just be like, I'm laying here.
Unbelievable. Like,
It's crazy.
It's so interesting to me to see you going through this part of the process again, because I forgot that this is like the most manipulative.
It's so manipulative.
I
but
swear
it makes me, like,
wears down a little bit.
I'm half proud of her,
Yeah.
but also it's just like
Waterboarding you.
she's kind of waterboarding me. Like, she's breaking me down to nothing. So, like, again, if we were going to say, okay, I don't want to do that part anymore because it adds another 20 minutes to bedtime that we shouldn't have to add.
Right.
So I mean, this will be good for you to
Okay.
fill out these things. I mean, you've actually, the deeper we get into this is why we go into a home and do an assessment, and we actually, part of our assessment will be like watching the bedtime routine, because sometimes what people say doesn't capture it, fully. So it sounds like perhaps she's never really learned to fall asleep on her own.
Right.
You're rocking
Yes.
her to sleep.
Right.
And I remember that stage, but I don't think it wasn't going on at 2.5. And that's not a bad thing or what, but it's, so right now a sleep dependency is one of you two
Has to
rocking
rock her
her.
or something.
Right.
Although again, we can go back. Is that an absolute dependency? No, because when your sister-in-law or
Yeah,
her aunt,
their aunt, yeah.
when her aunt was there, she fell asleep on her own in her room. So she doesn't absolutely need one of you rocking her or lying down with her. But when you're there, that's her expectation.
Okay.
And so there's going to be, so how do we, there are lots of ways and baby steps to take to, so my inclination at this point would be to prepare you all to establish a nice routine, but that the end of that routine is you all placing her in the crib.
Mm-hmm.
And probably in the beginning,
Lots of,
being in the room.
yeah.
Like, but you're not interacting. Like,
So it's almost
she
like
learns,
we'd be appropriate for a fade.
Right.
the first thing
Absolutely.
is for her to learn how to put herself to sleep and to know that you're right there.
Right. So there's
But no physical
the
interaction.
rocking chair method is like you're sitting in the room with the baby or the child there, but you're not giving them that attention, but you're right next to them. And then you can fade that chair more and more directly out of the room until you're not.
My husband wants the chair gone anyway because it's ugly. It came from my grandma's house, so it's kind of like an heirloom, but it is not a cute chair. And so he's like, I want that chair
so two
gone
birds with
anyway.
one stone. When the chair's out of the room, then it can get,
Yeah.
I mean, I did that. I have memories of my daughter. We had a long corridor in our apartment when she was born, and we had one of those nice hiking 3-wheel strollers that fully reclined, and she slept in that a lot of nights. But we would go all the way down the corridor, around the living room, and then back out and all the way down the corridor into the dining room, and that was how she fell asleep.
Wow.
I mean, so I've done this,
what
you're describing, and eventually we got to the, a little after she was 1, we did the cry it out method in the crib, and when we did that, my wife had to go out onto the back porch, and she couldn't take the crying. The first night was about 45 minutes, and then this next night was 15, and the next night less than 5 minutes, and then no more until my wife is from Brazil, and so we'd go there every summer and spend several weeks with family, and we'd co-sleep. And every year coming back, we'd have to, and that's what I talk about,
readjust,
being flexible and deviating from a routine. And so the next couple of years, there would be a couple week battle, where she was used to, getting everything her way with all the aunts and uncles and co-sleeping. And then when she was, a little over 3 years old, she started having, she had nocturnal seizures. And then co-sleeping was a reality because there's no way my wife would leave her alone. My wife was so scared, and so so she was sleeping on her own, but she started having seizures, and so she started co-sleeping. And that was actually, we didn't really resolve that until she was 10. And we went and saw a child therapist and did some family therapy for that transition, because we just needed help. My daughter needed to understand some things. My wife, my daughter, thank goodness stopped having seizures, and so we got to that point where my wife was comfortable, and I recognized it was negatively affecting our family dynamic in a lot of ways, and so. But it was a process, and so that's you get used to one reality, and as soon as you get used to it, and you're like, I got this, something else
level
happens.
Up.
Yeah.
That wraps our episode with Randy Keech and Zach Benkovitz of Intervention Fundamentals here on the Parentcast, hopefully helping everybody get a better night's sleep. And again, I talked about this in the intro where I actually got to go home and try some of the things that we talked about in the episode, and they worked. And I did not believe that they would work. I kept thinking, well, yeah, but not for my kid or not in my situation. So when we were talking about sleep dependencies and baseline, I'm rocking my kid to sleep, and I started thinking, well, let's determine whether she has a sleep dependency or not. What happens if we skip the floor time and I put her right down in her crib? Put her down fully awake, and she just waits for her blanket and looks at me like, get out of my room, lady. So 3 nights in a row of a kid that put themselves to sleep, I am a believer. I had to write Randy and Zach a very nice email for coming on and really, really helping us out. Now, if you have a problem in your home with sleep, again, communication, potty training, food interventions, Randy and Zach are your guys. So again, interventionfundamentals.com. They help kids with a lot of issues, and then also, run-of-the-mill kids who are just having a hard time with regular routines. Again, this is behaviorism, so if you want to check out more resources, we tried to include as much as we could in the description under the video cast here. So that'll kind of link you up with other ways to get a hold of these guys. But we will have a brand new episode coming up for you on Thursday at 6 a.m., iHeartRadio, iTunes, Google Play, and of course the videocast at dve.com and 1059thex.com. So for my partner, Bill Crawford, who you can find at DVE Bill Crawford on Twitter, I'm Abby Krisner at Abby on the X, and we will see you next week here on the Parentcast.